we spend our entire lives distracting ourselves from ourselves because the thought of being alone is that scary.
Colin O'Brady, 10-time world record-breaking explorer, professional endurance, athlete, and motivational speaker.
I think that our minds can either be our greatest assets or certainly can be one of the things that really holds us back and limits us.
He is the first person to cross Antarctica, unaided and unsupported.
Yeah, I am deathly afraid of dying. However, what I am more afraid of is not fully living.
Uncover Colin's best-kept secrets to conquer your mind and unlock your life's limitless possibilities.
Solitude is a beautiful and very simple medicine. People come back and they go, this was the best investment of time that I've ever made.
We settle for this life that we're not meant to live. Talk to me more about that.
Most people are living in what I call the zone of comfortable complacency. But here's the antidote to that.
On day one of my expedition, I sat in my tent, started staring at all of my limiting beliefs and about why this was a stupid idea. This is a direct excerpt from your book. Tell me more about this.
Yeah, I mean, just context, that was me alone in Antarctica, attempting to be the first person to cross the entire landmass of Antarctica solo, unsupported, which means no resupplies of food or fuel, and then fully human powered. So no kites, no dogs, nothing to propel me, just mano-a-mano, trying to go 1,000 miles across the most inhospitable terrain known to man, and something that people had tried for many years before me and no one had successfully completed. That quote is, it's funny. It's interesting. You dream up a big idea, you have a big goal. You're sitting in the warmth of your house, like, oh, this is gonna be amazing. I'm gonna train for this. A lot goes into a project. Get my body right, get sponsors. All the things that go into that. And then you start. You think it's gonna be this great. This is gonna be amazing. All of a sudden, it just gets smacked in the face. Like, what am I doing out here? I'm alone in Antarctica with 1,000 miles in front of me, pulling a 375-pound sled, and I think that our minds can either be our greatest assets or certainly can be one of the things that really holds us back and limits us. And in that moment, all of those doubts, all of those, limiting beliefs, even though I'd been a successful athlete, I already had world records at this point, I'm not impervious to, Colin, this is a stupid idea. You're not strong enough. You're not capable. This isn't going to work out. Why the hell are you out here in the first place? And that loop really started running in my mind at the beginning of this project.
That's so interesting because, like you said, you were a very successful athlete, sponsored and everything. You had run like triathlons or Ironmans or whatever it was, but basically you had achieved already, from what I recall, I think you had already done like 7 peaks across the globe or something like that.
Yeah.
And so you were not somebody who was just like, all right, I'm just like getting into this place for the first time. It wasn't the first time you were challenged your body or had challenged your body, but still you had all those beliefs. What was the most dominant one that you think, or that you can recall right now? Like, the biggest thing at that time for me was,
yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, I'd been a professional athlete for the U.S. national team, racing triathlons all over the world for 7 years on this sort of Olympic development path. And then after that, I'd already set 2 world records, climbing the tallest mountain on each of the 7 continents called the 7 Summits, as well as completing expedition in the North and South Pole, something called the Explorers Grand Slam. So I've been on the summit of Everest. I've been to the North Pole, the South Pole. I'd already been in Antarctica. I'd already actually had some reps throughout my entire life, as a nationally ranked athlete all the way as a kid, all the way through swimming at Yale. And here I am still this deep into my career, having doubts, As far as what was the most recurrent doubt, God, there was many in that moment. But fear of failure, really fear of failure. I remember in that moment, it's interesting. I had done a big, article with the New York Times. They were going to do a big feature. In the end, over that course of that, they wrote 8 feature articles about this expedition and really, popped it into mainstream in a really interesting and exciting way. And that was a big breakthrough in terms of press and media to have such a renowned outlet covering it so closely. They sent a journalist down to South America as I was leaving, and a renowned photojournalist to photograph me at my departure and did this big feature, right? And there was something about I'd always announce my projects publicly. I have, large social media following, so I'm sharing it there. But there was actually something about just announcing it to the world at that scale and then struggling on day one. Day one, I get down there, I get dropped off on the ice. My sled's 375 pounds. and I honestly can't pull my sled. I mean, I can pull it like 10 feet at a time until I'm completely out of breath. So much so that I actually, in the first couple hours, I start crying. And when I start crying, Antarctica doesn't care. It's minus 30 degrees in Antarctica, and the tears, they actually freeze to my face. And I've looked up the list of the most, embarrassing and horrible feelings possible, and frozen tears on your face alone in Antarctica is pretty much high up there as like the worst feeling you possibly can have, feeling sorry for yourself. But there was something about, and I think that as humans, we experience this, and I certainly have myself, even though I think I'm quite confident person, there is something about failing in the sort of quiet of your own, bedroom, or I had this idea, but it didn't quite work out, but no one really knows about it, versus being like, I had just announced on, the front page of the New York Times, section, Colin O'Brady is going to attempt to be the first person in history to cross Antarctica solo. And here I am, like a half a day in, crying with frozen tears, like wanting to give up on day one. Now, I thought, honestly, I was open to failure with this project. People had tried, people had died trying this project. People had been evacuated after the continent of running out of food and fuel 30, 40, 50 days in. And I thought to myself, like, okay, maybe I make it 800 miles out of 1,000, give it my best effort, and for some reason I can't continue on. Like, that's a valiant effort. No one's gonna like criticize me for that, right? But day one, like that's embarrassing. And so I think there was this fear of failure, but I'll go a little bit deeper on that, which was the fear of the sort of that external criticism of like, bro, you made it one day. Like that's not like, hey, you gave it a good shot, pat on the back. It's like you told everyone you were gonna do this, and like you couldn't even pull your sled on the first day. Like that like was bubbling up inside of me, and those limiting beliefs were definitely very vivid in my mind in that moment.
Do you believe that fear of failure actually was a great catalyst for you in that moment? That you were able to tap into the energy of, fuck, everybody's watching, and I have to do it?
I think that's, it can be great fuel. Like I said, I think that some people, fall apart in instances like that, and others, really thrive. I've felt both throughout my life and my career, but what comes to mind for me is, I do a lot of public speaking. I speak for a lot of the biggest companies around the world. Something I love doing, passionate about being in front of audiences of thousands of people and stuff like that. And it's kind of a funny story that's come to my mind, which was recently I was developing a new keynote. Derivative of my expeditions, but really about mindset and breaking through, and it's called Go Beyond. And it's telling a bunch of different stories of my expeditions, but generally in my paid speaking engagements, it's framing it for a business audience. So how can people accelerate their business? How can people go beyond their own potential, or certain KPIs in business, whatever. And I love that. I love marrying those two things. I'm an entrepreneur, but also an athlete. I have an economics degree from Yale, so I can kind of combine a bunch of different things. And I love speaking. It's something I'm just like confident in doing. I know that's a big fear for a lot of people. And so I'm working with this woman who I work with on all sorts of things. This woman named Allie. She's amazing and does a lot of different aspects of my business. And I'm working on my speech, and I'm like, all right, let's run through it. And I'm in my living room at my house in Jackson Hole, and I'm like, all right, let's run through the speech. So I cook my computer up to like my TV. She's just sitting by herself in the living room, and I try to like roll the speech. And like, she's heard me speak all over the world, rooms of thousands and thousands of people. And she stops me after 5 minutes and she goes, that is literally the worst I have ever heard. Like, what's going on? I'm like, what are you talking about? And she was like, that was horrible. Like, you can't give this speech. And 3 days later, I was set to debut this speech for, a large banking client, 3 days later. And the day before, I was like, man, like maybe I shouldn't give this, like maybe I should just do the old keynote. Everyone likes it. It's great. I've got it dialed. But also my edge is like, I got to put myself out. Like if I'm going to debut my new speech, like I think it's good content, but like at some point you just got to rip the Band-Aid off. But I was like, in my mind, I was like, man, in my living room, like it was pathetic, like it was terrible. So anyways, I decide, it was like, I had both things in my computer, my old keynote, my new keynote, which slides am I to load? And right as I get there, I was like, you know what? Rip the Band-Aid off, give the new keynote, like just see how it rolls. I end up giving the new keynote, Go Beyond, standing ovation, and the CEO of the company comes up to me and he was like, that is by far the best speech we've ever heard. Thank you so much. Just glowing review, etc. So back to your initial question, this is not a story to like pat myself on the back, but it's to say like, funny how in your own living room with kind of nobody watching other than my one colleague, like it's like I couldn't quite get up for it. Like it just didn't come out right or whatever. But something about the actual pressure of the real environment. Like, hey, this is not a dress rehearsal. This is the real deal. Elevates me. So that fear of failure, to your point about Antarctica in that moment, was, yes, I was feeling very sorry for myself on that first day, but also I'm sort of oriented towards like, yo, but the people are watching, like it's go time. This is not a dress rehearsal. Like get up, get fired up. And that definitely held me accountable to unlock my own potential within. But I'm also aware of the fact that that can be a crippling thing for many people as well.
That's true. And I think the good lesson that I'm learning out of it is that you're somebody that knows yourself well enough to say, I know my energy is going to shift, my mind is going to shift, my soul is going to shift the moment I put pressure on it.
Right.
Like I am one of those people, right? So you almost probably are wired to respond to greater pressure versus less pressure.
Yeah, and something that I've researched a lot and certainly felt in my own life is flow, and I'm sure it's something you've thought about and talked about like plenty. And one of the flow triggers is actually real stakes, right? Real pressure, so to speak. And so for me, it's like, oh, I know that feeling, whether it's in an athletic pursuit, whether that's on the stage, whether that's alone when I'm writing one of my books or something like that. That feeling of flow. But one of the triggers is actually having real stakes. So it's funny how we think like, oh, it should be easier in your living room because no one's watching, and if you mess up, is like there's no consequences. But actually, tapping into flow requires there to be real consequences, to be actually alone in Antarctica, so to speak, proverbially, and having to really go for it actually brings out the best in people, I think.
That's true. And I was listening to another interview of how Christopher Nolan directs his actors in movies. All he comes and tells you is how much is at stake. So if, let's say, you're underperforming or you're underperforming on the emotion that you're bringing to the story, he would come and say, the stakes are higher. And so suddenly you're like, all right, so I'm not putting enough stake in this story. I'm not putting enough stake in this moment that is doing whatever it is doing in the storyline. Or there's too much stake. You're putting too much stake in that. And so suddenly the actor kind of relaxes a little bit and goes, all right, fine, I'm not going to put that much stake. And it kind of leans them off that story. And I realized that's one of the most powerful things to consider when you are on stage, at least for me, is that when you tell a story, you think of the stake in the story, not just the story, because sometimes stories can be so step by step. But once you lean into how much was at stake at that moment, your story changes. And that tells me, and I'm guessing that's how you're wired as well, is that more stakes you have, the more your biology responds to it. So it's almost like you want to increase the stakes so you can respond and get into that state of flow without, of course, like completely getting your nervous system out of whack. So you got to know what's your level to handle it for now in that particular context of life.
Well, sometimes people ask me, just keeping on stakes for a second, because there's a thought experiment that I've done. I've been fortunate to summit Mount Everest twice, and people are like, what's it like up there? What's the view from the top like? Whatever, I'd love to go up there, but, climbing mountains is too dangerous, and I don't feel comfortable doing that. And I, first of all, totally respect that point of view. It's not for everyone. But I also ask myself this question, which is, if someone said to me, hey, Colin, you can climb Mount Everest, and there's 100% chance you're going to succeed. There's a 0% chance you're going to die or you're going to get injured. Essentially, no stakes.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, like, that's the same feeling of like strolling around your neighborhood, like, with your dog, which is like a nice casual afternoon, but it's not the heightened peak experience that I've experienced on the tallest mountains in the world. Like, it is the stakes in themselves that actually drive any given experience. And again, everyone has a different risk tolerance. I'm not trying to say what any people do, but the point is, more globally, when you have stakes, it allows you to tap into those heightened levels of emotion because there's a real consequence for your mistakes, your missteps, so to speak.
Absolutely. And I love that part, that if you become aware of what's your tolerance of stakes, you can decide for yourself what is it that is as an experience that you want to take. Of course, Colin's, for lack of a better term, is a little nuts. He goes and crosses Antarctica unassisted, and like at times, and if you read the book Impossible First, it's like crazy. Some of the times it's like, yeah, he really could have been dead and nobody would know. So the stakes like crazy. Your ability to take your risk threshold is insane from a lot of lenses. But if you're aware of your own risk tolerance, or your ability to look at, okay, this is how much risk I'm willing to take on this thing, you also can kind of be okay with the outcomes that you're going to have, right?
Right.
Because you're like, okay, I know how much risk I want to take. And so proportionate to that, I will have outcomes. Like I'm not going to cross and cross Antarctica or climb Mount Everest. My tolerance is not that high, right? Because that is, the stake is high.
Sure.
You could die, and people do. So you need to know how far you're willing to go. One thing that I want to explore, as you were talking about, you presented to one of your colleagues, and they said, sucks, your talk, that is. And then 3 days later, you give this talk, and it is standing ovation, one of the best talks ever, right? What happened in these 3 days?
Yeah, it's a good question. For me, I think a couple different things. One is practice and preparation sometimes is messy, right? It really is. Like that's why you're practicing something. You're getting reps. And I think that, I'm not a neuroscientist, but I think that your brain, it needs a couple of paths, some neural pathways to get opened up. All right, that's, in my public speaking, I pride myself on linking a story to a strong concept that's a real take home that links into another story. It's, it's a symphony. It's a braided, arc throughout. It's not like these distinct things. And sometimes it takes a second, like those transitions. I love to study, public speaking in general. I love the art of it. You notice it if you really study it closely, but the average audience isn't feeling into it. But it's in the transitions. It's in these moments in between, so you can move from one concept to the next seamlessly. That ends up driving something powerfully, and that can feel very like stilted in your own living room. So I think part of it is literally like the neural pathways getting built. Like the terrible rep that I had in my living room actually was a foundational block to a positive outcome. And then moreover, I think, as we've talked about, it's that actual, that feeling and knowing myself. I appreciate the sort of what you pointed out there is I've had enough practice at lots of different things to go like, oh, like I'm someone that like put the lights on, put me on stage, roll me out there, and it actually comes out better. Not like, oh, it's going to be worse in this environment, but trusting myself. I've built that trust in myself to go like, oh, I actually perform the best when there are stakes, again, in those environments. So I think those two things happen. One, the practice actually did inform that and allowed me to like, oh, that didn't work. Like sometimes the best thing you can do for anything, any business, any, goal or whatever is to go like, oh, that didn't work, or, oh, I don't like to do that, or that's not my zone of genius. Like you need to actually figure out what doesn't work oftentimes to figure out what works. And so that bad practice helped me to feel into some of those things. But also it's then just feeling into that trust, taking that deep breath and being like, you know what, like let's jump off the cliff. Like this is going to be even more embarrassing if you fail in front of, thousands of these banking executives that paid you a bunch of money to be here, but you're never going to know unless you get that shot at it. And so instead of being afraid of that, it's actually stepping into the fire of that and leaning into it. And I think that elevated my game in this case.
So what I'm learning here, and I want to capture it, is if you think today you suck and tomorrow you want to get better, there are two steps as of now that we have discovered. One is really build an understanding of yourself, of how you perform as a person. And it could be put the spotlight on, it could be go internal, do whatever you need to do, right? Everybody's got their process. And the second is just do the damn thing. Yeah. If you'll do it, you'll get reps in. It'll probably suck. It'll probably not land. You're also a professional speaker, so probably you going from really shitty to really good in 3 days is because you've done this maybe a billion times at this point, right? But if you've never spoken in front of people, expect the first one to suck as well. Like it's not going to land probably, even with all the practice in the world, because the way you are performing or who you're performing for is the first time for you. So that is still a wrap.
Well, and that's funny. We're talking about speaking, but another really funny story comes to mind. I'll share it quickly. Early on in my professional speaking career, I'd done a couple of small little speeches here and there, but after my first big world record project in 2016, one of the top speaking bureaus reaches out to me. It's the first time like a big bureau had ever reached out to me. We've got a client that wants to hear you speak. They saw you on TV and like, do you do public speaking? And, they were like, and what's your fee? And I like thought of like the highest number that I could possibly think of, and they agreed to it. And I was like, oh man, like it probably should have been 3x that. So that was a learning process on the business side, but that's not the point of the story. So then I go to this speech. It's at the Ritz-Carlton in Philly. Mm-hmm. And, I'm in, at the time, I'm 38, almost 39 now, but this is, 7 years, so I was probably in my early 30s at this point. And, it's a nice event. There's 1,000 executives. It's in the Ritz-Carlton. And there is a professional speaker doing the opening keynote, and I'm doing the closing keynote. And Jenna, my wife, she was saying to me, she goes, we go, let's go watch the other guy speak. Let's go see the other guy speak in the morning. And so we walk in there, and this is my first like big speech. And this guy named Mick Ebling, who I'm still friends with, incredible speaker, walks on stage and just slays it. Like just absolutely crushes this speech. Like he's a pro of all pros. He's got people laughing. He's got people crying, like full standing ovation, whatever. And Jenna looks over at me afterwards and she was like, you're screwed. Like you're completely screwed. Like, and I was like, what do you mean? She was like, I mean, you've given a couple of speeches before, but that we just saw, it's like a high school football
like
player going to an NFL game and being like, we're going to put you in there like next. And sure enough, like I got through the speech, it was fine, but it like went on 20 minutes too long and like it wasn't perfect, whatever. But the point being is like, those are one of those moments where it's like, to your point, it's like, you got to just get in the arena. Like you can't be a professional speaker until someone's like, I'm paying you to speak. And then you got to go out there and like, maybe it's not your best speech like ever, but you got to try. Like, I love the phrase, like, don't let perfect be the enemy of the good, right? Like, you got to get those reps in. And so, yes, now after thousands of other speeches and that confidence that's been built over a decade of professional speaking and all the things, I love the industry. I've thought about it a lot. I've, sharpened my craft, etc. And like, there's always a good lesson in like, don't compare your own, chapter 1 to somebody else's chapter 20. What I did is I walked over to Mick Ebling. I said, hey man, can I get your phone number? And he was like, yeah, sure, man. Like, and I was like, I'm new to this. Can I call you later this week and just talk? And like, he ended up mentoring me. We had a couple like 1 hour conversations. He just helped me. And he was like, oh, have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? I wasn't afraid to say like, hey man, you're way better than me at this thing that I'm trying to learn about. Can you teach me? And that was hugely valuable. And we're still friends to this day.
I love that story for many things. First of all, I relate to that because when I started speaking, so most of the events I go to, they do NPS scores, or most of the events these days do NPS scores. For the first 3 or 4 talks I ever gave, I was the lowest rated speaker, like the lowest rated. It was like the bottom of the bottom. Nobody's dropping below 4, and I did a 3.6. So it absolutely sucked getting that feedback. Of course, people were like, shit, you're terrible. You're like, nobody else is even below 4. You're the only one. And you're not even like, oh, you're 3.9. No, you're 3.6. People hate you as a speaker. But not hate you, but they don't really appreciate or like you being there. And so it really... Even with that, because I knew that I wanted to do this, of course I took all the mentorship and the training and I kept at it for maybe like 3 or 4 years. And now I'm like on the top few speakers, if not the top, of every event that I speak at. But when I started, for the first 3 or 4, I almost felt like I shouldn't be doing this. Yeah. Because this is like really bad. This is not bad. This is like the worst they've had at the entire event. Like you're the worst rated speaker. And by a margin, not even like close to the, you're not the second worst or anything like that. So it kind of really put me off. So I love your story of that. The first time it might suck and it's okay. And the second thing that I absolutely love is how you approached the person that you were like, that person's inspiring. That person's awesome. I love how they present on stage. Let me just ask them to be mentored by them. And not everybody's going to say yes. Of course, they probably said yes also because you were one of the speakers. Because speakers, especially mentoring other speakers, is really hard because a lot of people ask them for it. But being able to be humble enough that I've, achieved all these things in life, but then there are these other things I want to get great at. Let me ask somebody who can help me. I think that's a great trait, and that's a great capture for anybody that is listening right now to go, who can I ask help from? Who can I get mentored by? Who can I get a training from? I've spent thousands of dollars in training myself to be able to really understand how it works when you're actually on stage trying to capture attention, when you have 30 minutes, when you have 1 hour, when you have 5 minutes. Yeah. And all of that is very important as a training to build. So I'm grateful that you shared that because that's important. And that also brings me to the next question I want to ask you, which is, before your expedition began, you were evaluating everything that you would keep or not, including the music on your phone. I want to know more about that journey that you had, because it shows how much you had to really decide. And somewhere in that context, you talk about clean slate and how important that was for an expedition like this. Yeah,
it was an interesting thing. So the sled, as I mentioned, was 375 pounds. And that was as pared down as I possibly could. So one of the reasons that this solo unsupported expedition across the entire landmass of Antarctica was thought to be impossible, where people had failed, is basically people would run out of food. If you had enough food to actually feed you enough calories to go that distance, you're talking about 500, 600, 700 pounds worth of food by itself, because you're burning almost 10,000 calories a day. It's so cold. Essentially means like, I don't care how strong you are, like you're probably not going to pull an 800-pound sled. Like it's just, you're just not going to. I'll tell you 375 was pretty much my limit. I could only pull it 10 feet on the first day, right?
Yeah.
And I knew that going in, so much so that I knew I wasn't going to be able to carry enough food even to survive. I was going to probably lose 30, 40, 50 pounds, which I ultimately did over 54 days. So that forces you to say, like, what is essential? And it's an interesting exercise, right? Now, obviously, with the food, that's a big part of it. But it's like, hey, like, do I need, a toothbrush? Well, does my toothbrush need to have a longer handle on it, or can I cut the handle in half? Does this jacket need to have this tag inside of it? I mean, it seems crazy, like that's 1 gram there, that's 10 grams there, but it all, adds up. And, it was definitely an interesting exercise in like what you really need. So much so that I didn't bring an extra pair of underwear. I wore the same pair of underwear for 54 days straight. I had 10 wet wipes with me. That was like the minimum for the entire time in case of some, unforeseen accident. But I had the bare minimum, and it still was almost too heavy. Now, music, of course, doesn't weigh anything. Obviously, I was going to have, my phone with me. There's no connectivity to internet. You're in the middle of nowhere. Basically to have, that technology to allow to connect to a satellite phone in case of emergency and stuff like that. I knew I was going to have that piece of equipment with me, which meant one direction you could say is, okay, well, you're going to be alone for 54 days, load 1,000 audiobooks into your phone, 1 million podcasts, every song on Spotify, whatever, like, to keep yourself entertained, like being alone, like, what are you going to think about? I thought about that for a second. And then I came up with the opposite thesis, which is part of my curiosity for doing this solo crossing was, what is it like to go deep into my own mind, body, soul, and really explore solitude? I have sat 4 different 10-day Vipassana meditation retreats, and they've been some of the most valuable time I've ever spent, even though I'm very, very extroverted. My stepdad dropped me off in 2011. I was 25 years old at my very first Vipassana retreat. He's known me since I was a little kid. And he was like, yo, I'm going to sit here in the parking lot for the next hour because I've never heard you shut up for an hour in your life. You're telling me you're going to sit here silently for 10 days. But I stayed those 10 days, and it changed my life. And so solitude and exploring that was something that I was curious about. And then I thought to myself, okay, if I have my phone full of music or audiobooks or podcasts, and I'm constantly distracting myself, is that really solitude? Or is that essentially like having, a podcast host along for the ride, like chatting in your ear? And that could be helpful. But I thought to myself, again, thinking about flow, I thought, actually, I wonder if that flow trigger is going to go deeper when my mind is able to be at full calm, or at least at full focus. Now, in Antarctica, it's 24 hours of daylight, which means the sun never sets, and the sun's directly overhead, and there's nothing to see, and oftentimes it's white out. So not only are you in silence, but there's nothing to see. There's nothing to distract your mind with, and the sun's not even moving, so you're not even seeing long shadows or a sunrise or a sunset. It's like high noon every single day in this endless white box that's basically trying to kill you. Like, it's a very disorienting place, but I thought that's like the most pure form of tapping into my mind. And so anyways, I decided to say, I'm going to delete all my music, all my podcasts. But then I did caveat myself one thing. I said, well, maybe I'll just bring 5 albums with me that are meaningful from my childhood, just in case I need, a crutch to lean on at some point. And so I did that. I deleted them all, and it ended up being such the right decision. In the first few days, I'll tell you, I was like, Colin, you are an idiot. In those limiting belief moments, like, you are now my mind just starts spinning on all the things that we do, like to-do lists and this and that, and I'm scattered and all over the place. And I was like, oh my God, like, you're a prisoner of your own mind. We all are. We're a prisoner of our own thoughts. It can be like it's the thing that takes most of us down is our own internal experience, right? But once I settled into it and got quieter in my mind, what happened was, time started to bend. Like, hours would go by in seconds. Moments of deep flow would occur. Sometimes and sometimes not. There's times when it went by really quickly, but I don't think I would have gotten there without that stillness and silence.
There's a quote from your book which says something like this: Trying to quiet the noise of fatigue, doubt, and craziness led to quietening all the noises entirely.
Hmm.
Can we take a walk down that thought?
Yeah, I have, in a few different modalities, certainly in Antarctica alone for 54 days, essentially with all my music deleted. I think that I leaned on those 5 albums, a couple days out of 54, but, 50 plus days in complete solitude and silence. As I mentioned, the 4 Vipassana meditation retreats. A year ago, I sat a week in a darkness retreat, so pure darkness in a cave for an entire week alone. And that is even more intense because with zero visual stimulus, all you're left with is the voice inside of your head, just on this sort of like endless loop. And it's been an interesting exploration. I think that one thing that I think we are aware of, but aren't quite realize how aware we are, how this is, I started being curious about this idea of solitude. And again, I'm the youngest of 7. I come from a big family. I'm super extroverted, love to party, laugh, play, hang out with my friends, have a big community. It's not like I'm some like recluse, like at all. So for me,
confirm that.
Yeah. For me, it's actually pushing the edges of like my natural state of being is talking and listening and being in, noisy environments. Right. But you're originally from India, the most populous country in the world. Like there's a lot of people there talking, whatever.
There's no quiet there.
Yeah. In our modern society, not only do we have a lot of external stimulus from the world just kind of moving quickly around us, but we have these smartphones, right? We have an ability to have stimulus at all times, nonstop around the clock. And so after this, experience in Antarctica of really tapping into the depths of solitude and how powerful it was, I started just asking people like, hey, like friends, colleagues, people I'd meet, here and there, like what's the longest time you've ever spent in silence, in solitude? And they'd be like, well, define that for me. And I would say, okay, sleeping doesn't count. All right, take that off the table. So anytime you're in a room with somebody else, like that obviously doesn't count. But also when you're intentionally giving yourself stimulus. So if you're in a room by yourself, but you turn music on, or you turn a podcast on, or you turn the TV on, or you look at your Instagram or whatever, all of those things don't count. And so I've asked people like, what is the longest then that you have spent in solitude? And over and over again, people would like be like, they assume they're like, I must spend something. They're like, now that you asked me that, like 10 minutes, 20, 30, maybe this one time when I got lost on a trail on my phone and I had to walk back to my car for 20 minutes. Like basically people are going their entire lives without spending any time with themselves. And look, I'm fond of all sorts of modalities of tapping into the mind, body, spirit, yoga, meditation, all these sorts of stuff. But it's interesting to realize that as humans, that was not the case. If you go back not that far in time, you go back 100 years, but certainly go back 200, 500, 1,000 years, like the human race on this planet spent a lot of more time with way less stimulus in our brain. And we know this from all the dopamine spikes and all this kind of stuff. And so what I realized for myself was like, man, like I want to spend more time in solitude, and I want to spread that idea of people spending more time, in solitude. I imagine we'll talk about it at some point, but my idea for the 12-hour walk was born out of this. It is an inspiration and basically an invitation for people to spend 12 hours by themselves. But what I have found in my own self, as well as others who I have inspired to spend a little bit of time or 12 hours on a walk by themselves, is the recurring thing that comes back is people come back from a moment of solitude and are just so grateful. Like, wow, like I needed that. But here's an interesting piece that I'll share. So I'll, be on a podcast, or I'll be on a stage giving a speech, and I'll tell a story about, being on Everest, or I'll tell a story about rowing a boat across Drake Passage, or alone in Antarctica, or, in K2 where I lost 5 friends in a really bad accident and they died, and it was, a horrible tragedy that I live with every single day, 3 years ago. And then I'll say, I spent a week in a darkness retreat, by myself. And people will come up to me after the speech and they'll be like, all those crazy stories you shared, like, man, like K2, whatever, it's just wild, it's crazy. I don't think I'd ever want to do that, whatever. But like, of all the things you talked about, dude, a cave by yourself for a week, that is crazy. I would never do that. That is insane. And what's the reason I bring that up in this moment is that like it's always so interesting to me to go, here's somebody who's definitely never going to go climb Mount Everest, going to like take this actual objective risk where they could die. They're not going to die in the cave. They could die on the mountain. But in their own mind, they're more afraid of the cave in darkness than they are of climbing a mountain that has a glacier and avalanches. You could fall off the side of it, whatever. And I think to myself, what does that mean? That means that the average person walking around is deathly afraid of themselves. Of themselves. That is actually people's biggest fear. So we spend our entire lives distracting ourselves from ourselves because the thought of being alone is that scary. Now, I'm not advocating for spending your life alone. Community is obviously the bedrock of happiness. But to never take any time to sit with themselves, and I'm sure with your work, you've come across people that go, I want to live a passion, I want to live a fulfilled life, I want to this, but I don't know what my passion or my purpose or my goal or my drive is this. And I'm like, I don't think you've taken a second out of your busy to-do list life to just sit in stillness and reflect. And I'll tell you what, just like that first day of Antarctica or the first few days when I didn't have my music, it's hard to get through the first day or the first hour or the first moment, right? Like that's when everyone wants to quit. People are like, I want to get in shape running. They go for one run, you know, like, oh, my ankle hurt, I was out of breath, and they don't go back for the next day. What I find is, man, if I can get past the first hour, the first 3 hours, first part, all of a sudden there's stillness. But that stillness comes from going through the discomfort, through that sitting with yourself and going like, oh my God, like who am I? What are all these thoughts? Like, am I doing this to myself every single day? And the truth is yes, but not giving yourself enough time to fall through that and come into that flow, into that clarity, into that. And so I think solitude is a beautiful and very simple medicine that we actually all have access to. It's free, it's available anytime on any given day. It just takes the discipline and commitment to be like, I'm going to sit with myself today. And it's incredible how scary that is for most people.
That's so true. I think there was a research done, and I could be wrong about the exact data, but from what I recall, the data suggested they actually got people to sit down without stimulus on how long they can take it. I think an average they found for females was 8 minutes.
Yeah.
And for a man was like 12 minutes or something like that. That was after which they lost it. They were like, nope, I need stimulus. I need something because I cannot just sit. I cannot just sit and be with myself. They couldn't be with themselves. And that's one of the things, and that's why I'm so excited to have you today, is because that's one of those things that I haven't done 12-hour walk, but I'm actually curious. I was talking to Neeta, my wife, for people who are listening, on how I want to do it, and I will most likely do it when she's away for a couple of weeks, because we're like, oh, I can actually then go ahead and do that because the kids are not home, she's not home, so I feel like I can take a day out and just do that walk. Because I've never spent 12 hours with myself. But I do know that one of the greatest assets I have is that my meditation practice is literally, I put on something so nobody can distract me. So I have to put like white noise or something on the back so I don't hear things. But then I just sit with my thoughts for like an hour. It used to be pretty much every day. Now it's maybe once in every couple of days, mostly because kids, busyness, all that stuff. And that is some of the most powerful work that I ever do. Because I really go, oh crap, this is what I'm really, like for example, like you said, most people who don't know their purpose and passion is because they usually think, oh, that person's doing that, I will do that, and that's my passion. That's stimulus, that's not your passion, right? Or they've never really spent any time with themselves, like you said. It's like, or they have, but with podcasts in their ears, or they have music in their ears. So they are being informed of who they should be versus discover who they are. And that's why I so recommend anybody to look up 12-hour walk. It's a phenomenal idea. And I think anybody, and you've made it so accessible because people can just go download the app, do the whole thing. They don't have to pay anything. It's completely for free. Of course, you can get the 12-hour book, 12-hour walk book, which has some amazing tools. And I want to talk a little bit about them as well. But it's one of those phenomenal tools for people who are in personal transformation, who are in personal development, people who want to help other people who are confused about their purpose and passion. Stop looking for tools. Look within, and you will find the answer. That is already, always has been there. It just requires time. It's not going to happen with 20 minutes alone time. It will take several hours, and then you can maybe build a practice. Like I've been grateful that I got introduced to meditation differently than most people are. To me, the way I was introduced to meditation was No, it's nothing else. Look at your thoughts. That's literally meditation. You don't have to worry about soundtracks. You don't have to hypnotize yourself. You don't have to do jack shit. You sit and observe your thoughts. And as you'll observe them, you will find clarity in your life on a daily basis. And you will clean out what's not yours. And you will sow more of what's actually yours. And you will discover more of what is actually yours. And then you can pursue that a lot more beautifully. And all your markers that you think you need to have, they will elevate, because now you're clearer about yourself. And the journey of self-discovery is such a powerful journey to have. One of the ideas of 12-hour walk is something that I think, it might be in both the books, so forgive me if I'm not adhering to the right book here. But one of the ideas that I love from your trainings and teachings, if I may call them that, is the choosing your Everest. And that comes, I think it's in both the books, but the idea really is that you don't have to think what Colin can do. You have to think what you want to do. Talk to us more about choosing your Everest.
Yeah, so I mean, I frame this question as simple as this, what's your Everest? And that comes from when I was, a 6, 7, 8-year-old kid, I always dreamed about climbing Mount Everest. I grew up in Portland, Oregon. In Portland, you stare up at this mountain, Mount Hood, outside of the city, and I kind of was curious about it. Didn't grow up with a lot of money when I was a kid, didn't travel, didn't have a lot of, access to things like that, but that dream was just like, I wonder, where is Mount Everest? Oh, Nepal. How could I get there one day? It was just, a curiosity. And to your point, the question is what's your Everest? I love to tell these stories of my adventures, not because I have any desire for someone to be like, wow, pat me on the back for what I did. It's only valuable to share if someone can actually take something from that into their own life. And I think that we all have a masterpiece that we can paint inside of us. My canvas just happens to be the ends of the earth and mountaintops, and it provides a great metaphor. But, what is your canvas? What are you painting on? What is your Mount Everest? And, there's a couple of things that's been interesting. So for the 12-hour walk, essentially, quick origin story. I'm pulling my sled every single day, 12 hours per day for 54 days to just barely make it across Antarctica. And I end up completing that crossing and becoming the world's, first person to ever do so. And in doing that, as we mentioned before, I tapped into these deep places of meditative calm and flow. So much so that at the end of the expedition, I'm practically out of food. My ribs and hip bones are sticking out because I've lost so much weight. My body's in severe decline. If I had walked into a hospital in the state that I was in, they would have immediately put me in the ICU or something. They're like, this guy's gonna die. But my mind was so sharp and so clear by the end of this, so much so that on my very last day in Antarctica, I pulled my sled 77 miles, 33 hours nonstop with a handful of bites of food because I had tapped into these flow states of meditative peace and calm in my mind. And I also got in touch with, source energy. I started really, I put my arms out and I started just saying these words coming to me, infinite love, infinite love. I was so alone in the world, in the physical space, but I actually felt so connected to humanity, so connected to my family, my friends, my community. It was literally energizing my entire body. So fast forward a couple years later, I had an expedition planned to Everest. I was going to go back to Nepal. I had a couple other things on the book. And, here we are, and it's COVID happens. And of course, everything gets canceled. My expeditions being canceled are the least of the world's worries at that point, but it forces me to, basically sit alone in my house. And I'm sitting there and everything's canceled. And, Jenna's kind of looking at me like, you don't seem like you're doing well. I'd sitting there on my couch, you haven't changed out of your, pajamas in several days. And I was like, when was the last time I felt that peace and calm and flow in my body? And I actually thought, it was during my Antarctica expedition. And so I said to her, hey, I'm going to go for a walk tomorrow. I'm just going to go for a long walk and just kind of clear my head. That movement seems to help me. So I walk out the front door that day and I say to her, I'll be back by dinner time. It's great. So I walk out the front door and my phone buzzes in my pocket 20 minutes in. And I pull my phone out and I'm about to text my friend back who's ever texting me. I'm like, wait, what am I doing? During COVID, right? You're doom scrolling the news and reading the headlines and checking your social media, and Zoom calling people was new. You're like, what? I was like, I don't need my phone today. So I put my phone in airplane mode and I start walking. And I end up walking for 12 hours that day. Not trying to go a certain distance. I stop, I take plenty of breaks, I sit down, I reflect, but I'm alone by myself like I had been in Antarctica, but instead I'm on the Oregon coast. And I walk back in the front door of this small cabin we're staying in that my family has in the Oregon coast. And Jenna looks at me and she goes, "You're back." And I look at her and I was like, "Yeah, I told you I'd be back around dinner time." She goes, "No, no, no. Like, you're back." Like, she could see this shift inside of me over the course of that day. And I looked at her, I said, "You're right. I actually feel better than I felt in a really long time." But I think nothing of it. I'm the guy who walks across Antarctica. I'm this athlete, you know, whatever. And people start calling me, you know, we're catching up with your friends like we all were doing. How are you doing? How's your family? You know, catching up with people during COVID. And I started telling people like, "Oh, I did this thing. It really kind of reoriented, really reshift where my mind, body, soul was." And what'd you do? I said, "I went on this 12-hour walk." And they're like, 12-hour walk? And I was like, "Yeah, it's not about like, you know, how far you go. I think I take as many breaks as you want." Before I knew it, friends and family members started taking me up on it. And my ultra marathon friend, he did 50 miles or something, like, you know, walked super fast, really far, whatever. My mother-in-law, 77 years old, she does the walk. And for her, it's one time around her block, but then decides to sit silently on her porch in North Carolina for an hour and then do another one time around the block, right? And I realized neither one of the people were doing the 12-hour walk more right than the other person. It's accessible to everyone, as you mentioned. And so I wrote a book called The 12-Hour Walk and have created this global movement. You can check it all out on 12hourwalk.com. There's an app that helps support this, but it's a simple idea. And the idea is what I'm talking about. It's literally an invitation, completely free, for people to put their phone on airplane mode, walk out their front door, and spend 12 hours alone by themselves. And your question is, what's your Everest? Now, I find that there's two groups of people. Obviously, there's some gray area between all of this, but two distinct groups of people. There's the people, when I ask them the question, "What's your Everest?" They say, "My Everest is this. I just don't know how to get there, or I'm working towards it, but it's a long journey," and whatever, right? They're on the path, but they actually know where they're going. But as we mentioned before, there's this whole other subset of people that go, "What if I don't know what my Everest is?" And in the 12-hour walk, it's an invitation to spend that time alone yourself, but I encourage people to set an intention. So for those that are like, "My Everest is X, but I have these limiting beliefs or things that are standing between me and that destination," I say, great. Spend some time alone in your thoughts, allowing your brain to think or not think or flex or, you know, ideate or have creativity around that. But for the group of people that are like, "But I don't know what my Everest is," I say, then you've got your answer for the walk. Walk out your front door and say, what is my Everest? What do I care about? What are my values? And it is amazing to me. At this point, I've had, I don't know, the now 100,000 people around the world, you know, in 40, 50 different countries have taken on the 12-hour walk at this point. And my personal Everest is to inspire 10 million people one day to take the 12-hour walk. And in doing so, people send me videos at the end of their walk, and it's just one after the next. People, they're crying, they're lit up, they're unlocked, and they go, "I didn't think anything was going to happen." And then something happened. Hour 9, it just came to me. Boom. And this is what I'm passionate about. I've seen people reorient their life. I've seen people have had this creativity, you know, in their businesses, in their relationships, and repair, you know, deep clarity on all sorts of things just by engaging the silence, not by how far they walked, by just taking a day. You could sit on your front porch for 12 hours. That's fine. That's what's still the 12-hour walk. And you also said this thing about time. So in the book, I break down 10 common limiting beliefs. I won't go through them all now, but one of them is, well, 12-hour walk, I mean, I'm busy, I've got my wife, I got kids, I got this, I don't have a time for that. And that's a real limiting belief. I feel that sometimes. I know you feel that sometimes, you know, it's just part of it. But there's such an interesting thing that I have found about these 12 hours is they're so potent, and people come back and they go, "I almost didn't schedule this because I just didn't figure out how I could fit this into my busy life." But the crazy thing is, this was the best investment of time that I've ever made. I've been spinning on this problem at work that I've worked thousands of hours on trying to figure out, and I can't solve it. And it came to me during the 12-hour walk because I took a day to be in stillness, right? Or, you know, someone's debating, you know, I hear this all the time, like, "Oh, I got this job opportunity to, you know, go to the other side of the country, but, you know, I have to uproot my family. I had this, I did this whole pros and cons list, and I couldn't figure it out. There's pros and cons, and should I do this? But just they're tying themselves in knots." Mm-hmm. And I've heard of many versions of the same story. And I took 12 hours. I walked at my front door. I sat in stillness, and for the first time in years, I could hear my intuition. I realized that the answer lay within me. I don't know what the answer is for you. I can't tell you what the right decision is. More often than not, we know the answer. It lies within, but it have to actually allow your mind to not be distracted by your social media and your this and that and whatever. Go back to that the next day. And so that I don't have enough time, it's an interesting limiting belief, because people say like, wow, it was only 12 hours. It was only a half of one day that had this exponential impact. And I didn't have to like, pay for this expensive piece of gear or fly to somewhere to this or whatever. It's like, all you literally have to do is, if you have kids, you need childcare for the day, or, have your partner swap you out or something like that. It's out your front door. You need a pair of shoes and just a willingness to just spend a day by yourself. And it's amazing the insights that I've seen come from people through this process.
Beautiful. And I love that also, because I want to relate it to some things that we do in our businesses. So I train coaches. We've trained about 6,600 coaches on the methodology around life coaching. And the first two parts of that methodology is presence and organizing your mind. Presence is about understanding that the complete control of your life lies in this moment right now. It's nothing to do with your past, nothing to do with your future. All the shit that you told yourself about the past can be forgotten about. Every fear of the future can be taken care of or not worry about. If you can get present to this moment, you have full control of your life today. So the greatest key of coaching yourself or creating results for anybody else is to get them to be present. Right? That's the first tool. And the second tool, there are 4 tools, but the second tool there is what we call organizing your mind. And organizing your mind is all about choosing a different thought than what you have always chosen, because you've always defaulted to a thought process. There's a way you look at the world and you just believe the world operates that way. It's neither true nor false. It just is the story that you've told yourself enough times, so you believe it to be true. The world operates in many different ways, in unique ways, and you can never guess it. You can choose a different way for deciding how the world operates. It's actually all of them are true. The reason why everybody has a different life is because their truth is different. It doesn't mean one truth is less than another one. It's just a choice we make, right? So those are the 2 key things. And the reason why I wanted to talk about it or wanted to relate to that is because those are the 2 tools that I see completely being implemented in these 12 hours. Unconsciously, consciously, however you want to say it. And you stumble on this idea by yourself, independent of these 2 tools that I'm talking about. But basically, when you're walking for 12 hours, especially with no stimulus, like no real stimulus, that is constantly distracting your mind, and you're with your thoughts and you're being with yourself, at one point, you get really present to it, right? It might not happen the first 20 minutes. It'll probably happen the first 2 hours where you'll go, oh, I'm really present to all the shit I tell myself, all the thoughts I have, all the stories I built up, just because of the idea of that you're in movement and you're just with them only. And there is no other stimulus in there. So you get really present. And at some point, you start organizing your mind. You're like, but that's not really helping me. This is the solution that's not really helping me. And so maybe this is what I really need. And that's where I think the discovery of purpose and passion comes in. Also, there is and again, the study itself, I don't remember, but I know and this is a real experience anybody can relate to in like 5 seconds, is if you think about your best ideas, they most often came when you were like in a shower.
For sure.
Or you were going for a walk.
For sure.
Or you were doing something that was so brainless in a way. You were driving brainlessly.
But you
and
created
suddenly
the
you're
space.
like, oh shit, I have the solution.
Right.
I know how to solve this problem. It's because you had a little bit of space. Now expand that over 12 hours. You can find your life purpose. Absolutely. You can find the passion. You can solve that really difficult problem because your mind has space and it has all the power. It always had all the power to solve those problems. You just never gave it space to process, to be able to find the real solution that is most congruent to who you truly are. I see how 12-hour walk works not only philosophically, which is the philosophy that you built, but psychologically. Like it makes sense on why the 12-hour walk should be something that anybody that is listening right now should absolutely consider doing it at least once. And scheduling is you're so right about it, that if you know this is a problem that is big enough for you, you will find the time, because you always do.
Well, and one thing that I love to share with people is that, of course, the 12 hours, the walk itself, the presence, the experience of that is very potent. But I always love to say that the experience of the 12-hour walk starts right now. So perhaps you've heard of this before, but let's imagine that most people listening are hearing about the 12-hour walk for the very first time. Just by me suggesting it, as you're listening to this podcast right now, you can't help but start to make some decision. this Colin O'Brady guy is full of shit. This is the worst idea I've ever heard. Or, oh my God, I'm interested in that. I'm on the website right now. I'm going to check it out. Or, I don't know, maybe one day. But something is happening in your brain. It forces you into a decision of some kind. And what I've realized is that just by, if I'm at a dinner party or if I'm talking to friends or I'm on a podcast like this and I suggest the idea, any person that's listening is forced to make a decision. And what that actually does is the book talks about 10 limiting beliefs. We talked about one of them. I don't have enough time, but here's a couple of, I don't have enough money. I'm afraid to fail. What if people criticize me? I don't like being uncomfortable, right? There's 10 of them. And there's more than that obviously in the world, but I talk about the 10 ones that very commonly dealt with. I deal with them myself every day. Just suggesting a 12-hour walk to somebody, because it's outside of almost everyone's comfort zone, or it's different than something that anyone has ever done, it actually forces a mirror in front of your own face. So if you're listening to this right now, be very aware of what came up in your mind when you heard, oh, this 12-hour walk, I'd like to do that, but fill in the blanks. I'm afraid to fail, but my feet would be so tired after that. I don't like being uncomfortable. Where would I find the time? I've got 3 kids and a busy job and a wife, right? Because what I've realized for people is that, like I said, the process of the 12-hour walk begins before the 12-hour walk, becomes the first suggestion. And we loop on this limiting belief. The thing I found is that whatever limiting belief has come up for you in the mere suggestion of the 12-hour walk is most likely a limiting belief that you are applying to all sorts of things throughout your life. It's actually probably the thing that's holding you back from living your deepest passion, your deepest purpose, etc. But here's the antidote to that. If you do commit to the 12-hour walk, and then you complete the 12-hour walk, what you can do with your mind is you go, I remember when Colin first said that on a podcast a month ago, and I said to myself, I don't have enough time. But I did make the time, and I finished a 12-hour walk, and it was a really positive use of my time. The next time that limiting belief, and it will come up again, for you comes up and go, I don't have enough time, you realize okay, little voice inside my head telling me that, I hear you. But last time I didn't listen to this voice, it was actually really positive for me. And so it actually, through your own lived experience in a visceral way, gives you a way to overcome that limiting belief by proving to yourself that you can, to your point, rewrite your own narrative, rewrite that own story that you're telling yourself. But it's very interesting to be observant, as we are in meditation, or your meditation of observing your thoughts of what thought came up for me right when I first heard about this for the first time? Because I am willing to bet that is a recurring thought that is holding you back. But here's the thing. You can overcome that. And the 12-hour walk, by actually doing it, is a way not to just find personal insight in the walk itself, but to actually face that limiting belief head on and prove that you can sort of circumvent it and rewrite that narrative.
Yeah, and every time you break a belief, you learn the skill to break another one as well. So not only would you potentially break that belief for every other thing and find a model to be able to overcome that belief every single time, but if you let yourself be in this experience and observe what's happening for you right now and observe for how you get over it, which is potentially doing the 12-hour walk, you may find tools to get over most of the other limiting beliefs that you might have. I truly believe that all of us are such competent human beings once we let the noise settle. Once we let all the bullshit that we've been told and we think we got programmed into and all of that stuff, once that noise goes away, once we stop telling ourselves whatever story that we are telling ourselves, we become the author of the story that happens next. So once you have a tool, 12-hour walk being a fantastic tool for somebody to be able to start rewriting their story, now you have the capability to write as many new versions of the story that you want to write, because all you have to do is, because like you said, 12 hours is not a lot considering amount of garbage time that we spend on things that we all spend on. I'm not criticizing anyone, and you must do whatever gives you joy. I love to tell people this question.
I was like, hey, have you ever seen that show Game of Thrones? Oh, I love Game of Thrones. It's so good. I'm like, so you've seen it? They're like, of course I've seen it. It's amazing. I'm like, me too. It's 75 hours long. 75 hours. That's how many episodes of Game of Thrones there are. You sat in front of your TV and you watched 75 hours of Game of Thrones. Don't get me wrong. I did too. I loved it. Entertaining as hell. Great. But just to be clear, you have the time.
12, you have the time, and you made time to be able to do this. So it is true. And this is true for all of us. And I think that's why the question that I do want us to also kind of explore before we decide is, what's important to you. Like, is personal discovery important to you right now? Is discovering those limiting beliefs, getting over them, are they important to you? And if they are, you will find the 12 hours, because it's not that hard to find 12 hours. You do find 12 hours for other shit that you don't care about. So you will find the 12 hours to the stuff that actually does matter. You just have to become aware of it and get really present to it. What do you think is happening in society at large from your perspective? Why are we increasingly seeing notes of loneliness?
Yeah, it's so interesting, right? It's this paradox between we've never been so connected as a species. Of course, the internet has changed everything, smartphones, etc. But as a result, we've never been so lonely. And yeah, it's an interesting thing. I think about community sort of into the two buckets, I suppose. One is our family, and that's, we don't get to choose our family. You're born into whatever, good, bad, in between. We all have and you have the greatest family. You're still gonna have some difficulties in that, dynamics are what they are, but they shape us and they form us, right? And then of course there's chosen community, which, as you get older in your life, you get to really choose, where am I going to live? And I'm not saying everyone has the ability to just hop on a plane and move their life to anywhere, but even if you live in a small town, what side of town you're going to live on, or what part, where are you going to have proximity to others, essentially. And then of course, like, what do you care about? How do you want to organize your life? And I'm sure you have as well. There's so much, amazing happiness research, out there. And there's Dr. Laurie Santos. I'm not sure if you're familiar with her work, but she's a Yale professor. I saw her speak at a summit 2 years ago. And she went through like the 10 things, she has this incredible, their course is like, they can't even basic classroom big enough because like just thousands of students want to show up. And it's an interesting reflection because it's like, wow, like college students are actually so unhappy that they're like eager to take the course on happiness, fulfillment, like teach me the hack, like whatever. And obviously this woman's done all this research, has all these academic papers, she's highest level academic, but it really boils down to a few things. And one of the main things across all species, across all socioeconomic classes, across all cultures ever, is community. It just is. It's just like we are as humans, like that is what really lights us up. And it's twofold. What I think is fascinating is there's your close community, right? There's like, who would you consider like your close circle of friends? Who would you call, your emergency contact or your spouse or something like that. But one thing I thought that's really interesting in this sort of happiness research around this and loneliness, and I'll share some of my own insights as well, but I've always been fascinated by this, is I'm not going to get the terminology right, but it's basically like casual community. And what that means is like the barista at the Starbucks that you go to every single day. Are you saying hello to that person? The doorman in your building, or the person that's in your elevator in your apartment building? Are you saying hello to that person? Saying hello to somebody on the subway? Your mailman, if you live in a place where you would ever see the mailman. And it actually turns out that because of smartphones, because of technology, it used to be not that long ago, if you're like friends with your postman, it was like normal to be like, hey, how are you, Dave? Nice to see you. Oh, it's sunny today. Just some basic conversation. We think like, oh, that's not important. That's like so surface level, whatever. But it turns out there's something about that. Another human acknowledging you in real life as another human being and saying some kind and courteous thing. You're doing that to them and they're just doing it back to you. But it turns out that the sort of gratitude that's explored and even these casual are super important to our state of feeling not isolated. Now, of course, you don't need me to proliferate on like, where smartphones has taken us the wrong direction. But we now, as we talked about before with attention spans, have this ability of what we think is like, oh, I don't need to talk to the person on the elevator. I don't need to talk to the person next to me on the subway or the bus or whatever, because like I have my smartphone and it's my own little world and I can just like go into there. But it turns out without real human connection in the flesh, there is obviously something, hence this loneliness epidemic, where people feel more and more and more isolated. Now, take that a step further, which is at our fingertips, we have the ability to have our basic needs taken care of without interacting with people. You can have every meal on Uber Eats delivered to your front door, and you can tick the box that says, don't even knock on my front door, leave it at the front door, because I don't even want to see you, right? COVID taught that to us. But now that exists well beyond a global pandemic where the driver is at any sort of odds of getting you sick. It's just like, I don't want to talk to that stranger, right? And man, I mean, it's it's an interesting state that we find ourselves in. But just like we talked about before, which is just the kind of like get out there and do something and try it. Like people ask me this advice around this all the time, and I don't have a perfect answer, but it's like, if you are feeling that level of loneliness, which so millions and millions and millions of people are, you have to a little bit have that ability to just try something, right? Like just, you know, is there a local group of some kind that you can join? Maybe you're, you know, whatever, you know, activity you're interested in or you like, but like you actually have to do it. Like you actually have to be like, hey, I'm gonna like walk into this room where I don't know anybody and like play on the local rec soccer league, or go to my, you know, church and congregation, or, you know, there's all sorts of different ways. Again, like I'm not any, you know, wasn't raised with traditional religion. My grandparents were Irish Catholics and, you know, whatever, but that wasn't a big part of my life. But there is something to be said. There's many criticisms that you can say about church and dogma and all this sort of stuff. However, there's also the other counterpoint, which is like, for a very long time, all around the world, and certainly the United States, which is less and less, numbers are decreasing, people showed up to a place with other humans and talked to them every single weekend. And those people lived nearby them. And so when things went wrong, they felt connected to a social fabric beyond themselves. So a question that I have asked, and there's friends of mine that are actually, you know, really deepening into this research of how do we do this without that construct, which is a lot of reasons why many people don't want to live by that construct. Well, what's come in place of that? Social media, like digital space, like we still need that, whether it's coming from the church or anywhere else. Like people need that in-person interaction, and it's hard to get out of our own way because it feels like the digital world is still pushing us further and further and further from those interactions.
That's so true, and I think that's also taken away a little bit of our ability to be able to interact in a physical world. Because I know tremendously social people, like they're commenting on your post 1,000 times, they're like super onto it. You send them a text, they'll reply in 13 seconds. You say, hey, let's get on the phone. They can't.
Right.
Let's meet and let's interact for more than 13 seconds. You can't. But text messages, you're like, but I traded like 100 texts with you in over 10 minutes. But you can't talk to me for 10 minutes because you get all awkward and weird about it. And that, I think, is because we've been behind a screen. And it's not to beat down, because of course it has served all of us in many wonderful ways.
Of course.
But at the same point of time, like you said, if you're conscious and aware of it, you can beat the loneliness epidemic. And I think there's a point, and I want to read this quote from your book. And Tatler taught me that life isn't about maximizing our time at 5, in the zone of comfortable complacency, hedging against fear, loss, and pain. Rather, it is about having the courage to embrace the full spectrum, the tapestry of all the ones and tens, and mundane moments in between. It's the key to unlocking potential and living fully. And I love this section. I think it's towards the end of the book, where you talk about there are ones you will have in life, there are tens you will have in life, but we settle for 5 most of the time. We try to not go because it feels too hard to do the 1, or it's too elevated to do the 10. And so we settle for the 5. We settle for this life that we're not meant to live. We're not meant to live in the 5s. We're not meant to, like, it's not fun. It's not joyous. Yes, it's scary that you could fall to a 1, or it's scary that you could get to a 10. And that also sometimes feels scary to some of us. But 5 is just miserable.
Yeah.
Talk to me more about that.
Yeah, I share a quick story on that. There's so many examples of it from my life. We've talked a lot about the solo Antarctic crossing, but I'll share a slightly different anecdote, which really rings true for me. So in 2019, after that solo Antarctica crossing, I got the idea of rowing a boat across the Drake Passage. So the Drake Passage is the most treacherous stretch of ocean in the entire world, at 750 miles between the southern tip of South America and Antarctica. And I wanted to see if me and a team of others could actually row a boat across it, which again, from the comfort of my living room, perhaps a 5, sounded like a great idea. A couple days in, we planned the project for a year and all the sponsors and the whole deal, but we finally are, set sail, so to speak. We don't have a sail, but we're rowing. And we're in a tiny little 28-foot long, 3-foot wide rowboat, open hull, and we're in the middle of the Drake Passage. The water temperature is basically, 32 Fahrenheit or 0 Celsius, should be basically frozen. There's icebergs in the water, and it's splashing us overhead. And to make matters worse, then the Drake Passage kicks up to 40-foot swells. 40-foot swell. So much so that we actually can't row our boat against this anymore, and we actually have to dive inside these little holes. And the hole's like the size of like the trunk of a small car. And now I'm in there, supposed to only be one person, but I'm in there with another guy. We're smashing there, and our boat is like smashing around like all over the place. It's the most afraid that I think I have ever been in my life. I'm like, this is the worst idea that you've ever had. You're in the middle of Drake Passage in a rowboat with 40-foot swells getting bashed around, and I'm like freezing cold and shivering, but holding this other huge guy, you know, he's 6'4" jacked Icelandic guy. I've wrapped my arms around him in like the fetal position, like, you know, what the hell are we doing? Talk about a low moment. Now, fast forward a few weeks later, we get through many, many storms in the middle of that ocean. And suddenly, one of the guys on the team just goes, oh my God, land. And we had made it. We had made it to Antarctica. And it was one of the most peak moments of my entire life. It's so beautiful, the Antarctic coastline. There's, you know, penguins jumping off of icebergs. There's, you know, dolphins. There's humpback. I mean, it's just like, you know, just an explosion of sensory, you know, it's just one of the most magical experiences of my entire life. And we land that boat on Antarctica, and we become the first people to ever cross the entire Drake Passage without a sail or a motor, fully human-powered rowboat. And when I get to the shore, this is one of the peak moments of my life. And as you mentioned, you know, the spectrum of 1 to 10, I start thinking about life on the spectrum. You know, 1 being our worst moments, being in that hole in the middle of Drake Passage, you know, wanting to give up and feeling I'm going to die, and 10 being our peak moments. Me getting to the edge of Antarctica, me seeing that humpback whale and that penguin jump off of the iceberg and had achieved this thing that I worked super hard to achieve. And what I realized in that moment, as well as at the end of the solo crossing in Antarctica, when I wrote that passage that you read back, is that I realized our 1s and our 10s are connected. That we don't often experience our 10s in spite of our 1s, but it's actually because of our 1s, our willingness to feel that way. Now look, I thought about it. If you had a mega super yacht or a private jet and you dropped me off on the edge of Antarctica where I got to with my rowboat, would it have been a 10? No. It would have been a 7 or an 8. Like, the place is so epic and beautiful that you'd be like, this is amazing. Like, I love this. But it was a 10 because of my willingness to have the stakes, to feel the cold, to feel the challenge, to feel the grit of the experience on my face. But now bringing that back away from expeditions, that's just a metaphor. What I realize is that as human beings in our modern society, particularly with our smartphones that can deliver food to our front door and entertain us and keep the dopamine spikes coming in enough doses that we can, like, you know, just kind of like go from one dopamine hit to the next dopamine hit, most people are living in what I call the zone of comfortable complacency between 4 and 6. Like, we all have that friend who, you know, goes to the job for 25 years, doesn't love the job, doesn't hate the job, whatever, but every single day is just a 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, just 365 fives in a row. Or, you know, sometimes relationships get to this place, you know, it's like, you know, it's not toxic, it's not abusive, but you're sort of like co-parenting, coexisting, and just in this mundane space of just like 5. It's comfortable, like, but like the passion's gone, but it's just 5, 5. 5 every day. Why do we stay there? Why are so many people stuck in that zone? Well, my thesis is this, is that we are so afraid of experiencing a 1 that we hedge against it. We hedge against a 1 at all costs. We say, I don't want to ever experience a 1. I don't ever want to experience a downside. It's funny because I don't care who you are through your life. You be the most rich and successful person. You read this. You're going to experience 1s because that's just part of life. But we think we can somehow hedge against the 1s. But here's the thing. When you hedge against the 1s, when you take the 1s off the table or the 2s off the table, you take the 10s, you take the 9s and 10s off the table. I think of it as like a pendulum that's swinging. Like, you need the full spectrum of the energy to like actually, you get to the 1s and it swings back to the 10s. So for me, the reframe on this, and one of the things I love to teach from the stage in my speeches and I, go beyond framework, the number one principle is I say, embrace your 1s and 10s. So for me, it's not that I'm going, oh, I want to feel a 1. Let me just like seek out so much discomfort. But when the 1s inevitably come, one, I'm not hedging against the 1s. I allow that to be a possibility. And when the 1s do inevitably come, am I uncomfortable? Yes. Am I afraid? Yes. Do I kind of not want to be in that 1 for much longer? Yet naturally, yes. But I also have figured out how to smile at the 1s. Like, I start feeling this discomfort and I start smiling. I'm like, I've opened up the doorway to a 10. Amazing. It's the portal by which we get there. And so I know I said a lot, but in summation, that zone of comfortable complacency is such a trap. Look, 5 can be an important place to be some of the time. I'm not saying live your life in only 1s or 10s, right? 5 is a good place to recover, recalibrate, settle down for a moment. But a life filled with 5s over and over and over again. I ask people this, the people that are living in that zone, I go, what'd you do last week? What'd you do a week before that? What'd you do last month? Tell me about something from 3 months ago. And you know that someone's in the zone of comfortable complacency when they just kind of go like, hold on, let me think. People actually, their brains are on such autopilot in this place and they're living so unfulfilled that they can barely even remember what happened throughout the year. Which means that most days they are waking up, living a life that they're unfulfilled by, and their brain is basically deleting it because it was so unextraordinary in that comfort zone. We've all said it a million times, but truly, growth comes from outside the comfort zone. But that means the willingness to accept that in the process of greatness or the process of having those peak moments, you're also going to experience some of that downside, the 1s and 2s. But the reframe is, thank God you've opened up the doorway to the 10.
So beautifully put. And as you were sharing that, I was like, imagine any great movie, great success story, the entrepreneur you like. If you recall that story for 10 seconds, you'll realize you only love that story because they had a huge one.
Yeah.
That got them to a 10, and you're like, I want to cheer for this person. And I like to also approach this from a point of view of saying, it's interesting to me to live my life between 1s and 10s. Of course, there are a lot of 5 days, and that's perfectly okay, but 1s and 10s are exciting because it creates a dynamic of life. It also creates a memorable life.
Yeah.
Like, what if when I was 80, 90, probably that's when I'll probably slow down, because I don't think I have the ability to slow down before that. But let's say 90, me and Colin are sitting on the beach and we are just, like chilling out. We get to talk about our 1s and 10s.
Yeah.
Otherwise, what the heck are you going to talk about? That you went to whatever that was just same every day and it was boring and it was not fun. Why would you want to have that story? That story doesn't even sound fun at the end of time. At the end of time, you want to have an interesting story to discuss so you can laugh about it.
Yeah.
There's a framework that I teach in one of my programs when we talk about identity shifts for people. And in that, the framework's title is 20X. And the key that we tell everybody to remember is, don't look at your last month, 2 months, 3 months, because you won't remember it. But if you look at the last 5 years of your life or 10 years of your life, you would see that you have 20X to yourself, most likely. Most people that are in my community are growth oriented, so they tend to have less 5s, but they definitely have a lot of 1s and 10s, or tend to have lots of 1s and 10s. So we would go, look at 5 years or 10 years of your life. If you don't believe you can 20X yourself, if you look at your past life, you'll be like, oh shit, I am fascinated by my life. I've done it so many times. Because now you don't only, because what tends to happen is our wiring system in our mind wants to only remember the bad parts, right? So we may remember our 1s, and that's what creates fear. And I don't want to go to that 1 again. Right. But we forget about the 10 that we have after that. It might be 3 months later, it might be 3 years later, but we get to a 10, right? From that 1. And when you remember, yeah, that was a 1, and then yes, there was a 10, suddenly you go, oh, I can get over any 1. And so anybody that's listening to this, do this exercise. There's a big possibility you have 20X to your life, and you will find your 1s and 10s. And highly recommended that you should do the 12-hour walk if you're not able to find your 1s and 10s, because you will probably find them during the course of that time.
And that's something that's obviously something I teach from that. It's the first limiting belief. I don't want to be uncomfortable. And people come back and they're like, literally they say to me, the dichotomy is right there. Like I said, the app prompts people to take a video at the end so they can have a reflection, and many people share them with me. And they're like, I'm back at my front door after 12 hours. My feet hurt. I'm hungry. I'm tired. Wow, that was the best day I've ever had. Right? The dichotomy is right there. Like, my body is a little bit beat up. I'm tired. I'm hungry. I need a shower. It was cold. It was snow, whatever, when they did it. And thank God I feel so lit up by it. And I love your, me and you hanging out at 90. I hope that is in our future, hanging out on the beach at 90, shooting the shit. But, people have asked me often, because of, of some of the implicit risk of things I've taken on my expedition. And many people have asked me this question, journalists and whatnot. And they said, well, Colin, do you have some death wish? Are you afraid of dying? And I thought about it. I mean, he was asked the question enough times, it forced me to really think about it, right? Thought about it, and I was like, Yeah, I'm afraid of dying. I am deathly afraid of dying. I had a close call in Antarctica a month ago that was horrible. However, what I am more afraid of is not fully living. Not fully living. And that's that 5, right? It's like I'm not just like trying to take on crazy risk or whatever, but me staying quote unquote alive while sitting in my house on my couch only watching Netflix or whatever that is. Look, I love to watch some Netflix from time to time as well.
Yeah.
You know, it's fun. Yeah. But like only doing that.
Yeah.
A life of only 5s. Like what is that at the end?
Yeah.
I came here in the perfectly preserved, box. I love I'm going to misquote it. It's not going to be perfect, but the Hunter S. Thompson quote that says, life is not meant to be, get to the finish line in a perfectly preserved box, but it's to become screaming and slaying and sliding into home base, bruised and beat up saying, wow, what a ride. Forgive the
beautiful
perfectly
quote.
misquote. Yeah, I probably didn't say it exactly right, but it's my favorite quote. Yeah. And that's to say, it's to say, and to your point, you look back on 90 years, you're the old man reflecting on your life, or old woman, and yeah, those peak moments, that moment I fell in love, that moment I had my heart broken, the moment my first child was born, or the moment a loved one passed away, right? Like that's the tapestry of life, and that's the juice right there.
Beautiful. And I love that also, because I feel sometimes people feel so scared of changing the world outside, but I'm saying any person that has lived life have tried to do not be a 5. They've tried to do the 1s and the 10s. Because otherwise, yes, you're alive, you're living, yes, you're breathing, and you're doing whatever you're doing. But if you really want to live, it's between 1s and 10s.
Yeah.
And yeah, you'll have 5 days, of course. But that's between 1s and 10s, and you need the 1s and the 10s. Thank you so much, Colin. It was a pleasure talking to you. And while I have so many more questions around so many other things, because of 2 books that you've written, which are both phenomenal. First is called The Impossible First. Please check out that book for the adventure that you had across Antarctica, and for the tools to be able to actually utilize the 12-hour walk is within 12-hour walk. As you can just go to 12hourwalk.com, of course, but 12-hour walk as a book is a phenomenal book. It has the 10 limitations that you talk about, and it would really, really help you shape anybody that's listening right now, watching this right now. It'll really help you shape and rethink some of the things in life. Colin, what are the other ways people can learn more about you, follow your journey?
Yeah, those are 2 good ways for the books. My website's colinobrady.com. That's got everything from my speaking. It's kind of a hub for all different elements of my business. And then I'm pretty active on social, mostly Instagram. It's just my name, @Colin O'Brady. Come say hello. And the 12-hour walk, although it is a lone thing, I love to say we do it alone together. And I really have built a global community of people that are energetically supportive of one another, that are curious. So you can do it from your own front door without telling anybody. But if you want some communal elements of that, come to the 12hourwalk.com. I also host per quarter, the first Saturday of every quarter, I do a global 12-hour walk day. So the next one is on April 6th of 2024. Not sure when this is coming out, but the first Saturday of every quarter, where people can actually sign up. And still, it's out your front door, but I do a bunch of programming. You meet with me as a group, and it's incredible. We just did our last one a few weeks ago to kick off the new year, and it was amazing to see folks, waking up in Australia doing it, then in Guam, then in, parts of, Japan, and then all across Europe, people all around the world doing it, but sharing in this WhatsApp thread and this community hub that I have of all these different sort of people all around the world taking on this walk alone together, but in the supportive nature of that energy. So the 12-hour walk, do it any day, but if you feel that draw to community, we talked about that, that striving for not being lonely, then would love to have you for one of the global 12-hour walk days as well.
Thank you so much, Colin.
Yeah.